folks. We're about 2 minutes past the hour now, and we have a lot of great material to cover, so we're going to go ahead and kick things off. My name is Brooke Horn. I am the operations manager for Book Industry Study Group, and as such, I support our committees and working groups and their initiatives, the Accessibility Working Group included. This webinar and its predecessor on the EAA are outputs of that working group in our effort to educate and amplify the work of other organizations around accessibility in the publishing industry. I'll drop that link in the chat in a moment, but without further ado, just a couple housekeeping things. We do encourage questions, so please use the chat. Please use that Q&A function for questions for our delightful panelists. None of us are lawyers. This is not legal advice. We're just here to share what we know and help give you some information to help with your preparedness. So without any further delays, I would like to turn things over to panelist Rachel Comerford. Thank you so much for coming and speaking with us, Rachel.
Thank you. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, now it's fighting back. Oh, here we go. Okay. All right. So thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm super excited to talk about this. My name is Rachel Comerford. I am the Senior Director of Accessibility at Macmillan Learning. I'm here with Michael. Michael, can you introduce yourself?
Michael Johnson, Vice President of Content at Benetech.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're here today to talk about accessibility and Title II. I think that we would be remiss if we didn't give you a quick overview of why Title II and the accessibility legislation matters so much before we dig into the details. So we're going to start with a quick look at what accessibility is, how it's measured, who benefits from it. And then after that, we're going to take some time to talk about what Title II is, what's changed, how long you have to adjust, and some other state legislation that's following along, and even some suggestions about how to prepare yourself. Afterwards, there will be time for questions, but please feel free to drop stuff into the Q&A. We will try our best to provide answers, and most importantly, remind you repeatedly that none of us are lawyers.
And just one other bit of info, this session will be recorded, so if you do have to hop off early for any reason, the session's recorded, and we'll make sure that you get the slides and that recording link.
Thank you so much. All right, so why is digital accessibility the right thing to do? Michael, can you talk us through this?
Yes, so when we talk about digital accessibility, we're talking about building technology, platforms, content, which includes everybody. The big advantage is when you do things properly, what we're talking about here is well-structured documents. So the more accessible a file is, the more accessible a website is, or any other digital content, it's better, right? So it's the right thing to do. It's the socially just thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do from a technical and content standpoint. You have some statistics and links on the page here. This is a huge issue, the issue around print disability. When we talk about print disability, we're talking about people who are blind, low vision, dyslexia, anywhere in the disc galaxy, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, or any number of other different challenges in individual situations where somebody might not be able to read a book in a digital format. And if you build a fully accessible file, everybody will be able to read the same file, and the file will be better. So that's why it's the right thing to do.
Thank you. Can you tell us a bit about the current standard?
Sure. So the current standard is WCAG 2.2. Most of the items we're going to talk about today are WCAG 2.1 because that's the way people write legislation. They do it on what's going on that day rather than saying current standards or things, but that's okay. Everything that we're doing at Benetech is on up to 2.2, even though the EAA and the ADA here in the States point to 2.1. These are all W3C working groups, various committees and things like that, and they are all actively being updated. So I love this slide here because it talks, I didn't do it, I should clarify that. I love this slide that Rachel did because the poor really covers it, right? So we're talking about perception, right? Can a person who can't see that item still be able to get quality alt text so they can perceive what it is you're trying to describe. And then operable. If it's designed that just says click here, or there's an arrow or something like that, and I can't use my keyboard, well, then the file's not operable for me. I can't navigate. I can't do in-book navigation. I can't get where I need to go. I can't go to the endnotes, footnotes, table of contents, glossaries, etc. Understandable. So as you're laying things out, you want to make sure that whatever the instruction is to the reader is clear and understandable. Now, all of these things, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, they're all there to help you make a better file. So I'd like everybody to start during this conversation to shift from, oh, we need to do this for the print disabled community, or, oh, we need to do this to comply with legislation. No, you need to do it because you're supposed to be good at your job. And if you do these things, you will be building better files. Now, there's that final point there, which is some states, Washington as an example, are starting to point to 2.2. So they're evolving with the actual legislation.
Great. And one of the things that we talk about when we talk about accessibility is, of course, testing. Can you tell us a little bit about manual testing and user feedback and why it's important?
Sure. So at Benetech, we use a blend. We use whatever tools are available to us that are effective, at least. But even in the case, as the slide points out here, automated tools can catch 30 to 50% of the issues. An automated tool can tell you, you don't have a good alt text for that image. It can't tell you if your alt text image is good or not. If you don't have one, then that's not good. So that we use them all the time, as do the production houses like Macmillan, who are far ahead of the game. So yes, absolutely use the automated tools, but understand machines are machines. And you're going to want to look at things that the machine says are wrong that might not actually be wrong, or things that the machine says are okay that aren't actually okay. So manual testing is always important. We do it, Benetech does it, a lot of other vendors do it. You should also do it internally. And I would encourage you on a small sampling size to manually test things that you sent out to have tested, just to make sure. And the bottom point is probably the most important, which is use your target audience as part of the testing. Because if you look at blue, green, and you're like, nah, I can tell the blue from the green. Well, if you get an actual blue, green colorblind person, they'll be able to tell you whether they can tell from blue from green.
Thank you so much. And then the last piece of this, before we get into the meat of Title II, is just the implications that this has on the publishing industry overall.
Right. So EPUBs are showing up everywhere. Just about everybody's already doing EPUBs, and it's true in any market you sell in the United States: education, higher ed, K-12, libraries, trade books, across the globe in international marketplaces. So it's happening already. Everybody's already producing EPUBs, and if you're not, then you need to ramp that up. And if you're producing EPUBs, please start producing better EPUBs. The statistic there from ClickAway Pound, it's almost 3/4 of the people with a print disability, they're just going to give up on the website or your content or whatever it is, because it's too much work. You're making it too hard for people to get what it is you're trying to share with them, whether it's a romance novel or a chemistry textbook. If you're not following the proper guidelines, you're just making it too hard for the audience to go through. The major distributors are putting in accessibility requirements and exposing the data. In the higher education marketplace, VitalSource, which I think sells more e-books in colleges and universities than anybody else on the planet, certainly in the United States, they fully expose all the metadata that comes out of the system, whether it's a GCA test from Benetech or whether it's self-reporting from a publisher. Amazon has started to point out the things that they're going to expose. So everybody along the value chain, the distribution ecosystem, is inspecting and communicating these accessibility metadata. And the new legislation, this is a very important part, the new legislation that's already been passed or is under consideration is going to make it a lot harder, make it a lot harder to not comply. So the slide before mentioned Washington State, Maryland, Colorado, even in Texas. So there are a lot of states that have even more aggressive and specific legislation around what you are or not allowed to sell in those states, especially to government-funded institutions. So it's coming up basically everywhere. And in the EU, this is everything available for sale, ebook available for sale in the EU. It doesn't have to be funded by the government. It doesn't have to be a textbook. It's any book at all in the EU. So this has global implications as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michael. So now we can dig into the reason you all came today, which is understanding Title II and its impact. And just a friendly reminder, I'm still not a lawyer. So what is Title II? This is a landmark civil rights law. It is 30 years old. Happy birthday to the ADA. The ADA was passed in 1990. It's a comprehensive civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life. So this includes jobs, schools, transportation, public and private places, and that are open to the general public. And it's divided into 5 sections, which we call titles. Each of those sections focuses on a different area. So one area is employment, public services, public accommodations, telecommunications, and miscellaneous. Title II covers the state and local governments. It specifically prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities by public entities, regardless of whether they receive federal funding. So this includes state and local governments. And it requires that people with disabilities have equal access to and benefit from programs, services, and activities. That is the broad overview of what Title II is and has been for the last 30 years. So what changed? It now explicitly includes digital accessibility. So in recent regulatory updates, namely in the DOJ ruling that was published in 2024, Title II was changed to or updated to apply to digital spaces. So it requires websites, mobile apps, ebooks, and other digital content from public entities to meet accessibility standards like WCAG. Since Title II covers all services that are related to government, it means that public universities and colleges, public libraries, school districts, they're all included within this. So if there's content that they're assigning to the student, websites that they're providing to access ebooks, internal support and training materials, all of that is included within the requirement for Title II. This means as a provider of those ebooks to any of those organizations, you are responsible for providing them with accessible content. If not, you can lose business, you can lose traction with your customers, you can lose a lot. So the timeline for this is spread out a bit. As I said, we saw the update to the legislation pass fairly recently. Now we have the first compliance deadline that's coming up fairly soon. June 24th, 2026 is the first deadline for a population served that is 50,000 people or more. So if you have, if you have a population that's serving 50,000 people or more, you have 53 weeks to meet those requirements. If you have fewer than 50,000 people that you're serving, and your timeline increases by another year. So what does the population served mean? That means that for state level entities, the population of the entire state is considered. And because I live and breathe education, in addition to accessibility, I will always give education examples. So if you have a state college or a university, like a SUNY system or University of Texas, that's a state level entity, and the entire population of the state would be what determines your compliance deadline. If you're a municipal department, it's the local population. So again, eat, sleep, and breathe education. For schools, it would mean that like a community college would consider the local population as their driver for the deadline. A lot of the customers that you are targeting are going to need to meet the first deadline. And it gives, while it gives like these smaller populations a little bit more time to adjust, it does mean that you have that you as publishers who are creating this content really need to focus on that first deadline that's coming up with these larger populations. So let's talk about enforcement. So the DOJ has pursued more than 200 digital access cases since 2020. It's probably a lot more than that. I was having trouble getting my numbers together. I'm sure that Michael will be able to jump in and tell me. But the steps of a DOJ pursuit of a digital access case generally has 4 steps or 3 steps with a possible 4th. The first is the review. So basically they're trying to figure out, does this actually fall under Title II? After that comes the investigation, which is where they're gathering evidence, they're having interviews, they're reviewing the sites that there's a complaint about. Then the resolution, and the resolution can fall into really one of 3 buckets. The first is a mediation. So the DOJ might offer services to facilitate the resolution between parties, and then each party agrees on what they're going to provide in order for it to be resolved. There's settlement agreements. So this can be a policy change, a modification to the facility, implementing a training program, or in some cases, financial compensation to the complainant. And if modifications are necessary, they're usually confined to a pretty tight timeline, and that's going to increase the financial commitment of an organization that needs to meet those requirements. It makes it a lot harder and a lot more expensive to make something accessible in a very short and tight time frame after it's already been released to customers. And then potential enforcement actions, right? So if like the organization that has the complaint against it refuses to comply, then the DOJ might initiate enforcement actions. There might be a lawsuit, and they might try to compel compliance. Non-compliance can result in loss of federal funding. So like for a public school, this would mean that they lose the funding that's necessary to support students. For a public library, they could lose the funding that's necessary for them to buy books from publishers. On top of that, as Michael said in his message before, you can lose brand reputation, trust, your ability to continue to provide materials to your customers are all at risk by not complying with these laws and by not providing accessible materials whenever and however possible. That's the overview of what Title II looks like right now, but it's more than just Title II. And I think it's important to acknowledge that as we sell not just internationally, and we keep in mind the European Accessibility Act, but also within each state, new legislation is popping up that's reinforcing Title II and has many of the same guidelines. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit of that, and these are just some examples. It's not comprehensive by any means. Apologies, I'm getting over a cold. And there are certainly going to be other examples and more legislation that's popping up. Michael mentioned Maryland, which I think is a great example. In Maryland, each local board of education and public agency has to comply with WCAG 2.1 level AA when they're purchasing or selecting digital learning resources. So the same standard that's required by Title II. But what comes along with this are what happens if the school does not make that purchase. It does not purchase something accessible, or what happens when the school is told that something's accessible and it turns out that the resource doesn't meet that requirement. And what happens in the case of Maryland is that there are fines ranging from $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how frequently the issue occurs. and also the requirement of indemnification. And this is where things get really dicey. So it says that contractors, which would include publishers, have to indemnify state, local, and county education boards against liability for failure to meet requirements. And in this case, again, not a lawyer, but in this case, indemnification would mean that the contractor, like the publisher selling the books to the school, takes responsibility for the financial damages to the school that they experienced from using your product, which you told them was accessible. This legislation is across multiple states. So we have Missouri, which has something similar as well. So they, again, require compliance with WCAG 2.1A and AA. And again, ask for contractors to indemnify government entities from claims that arise from failure to comply. And I see that there's somebody who likes the outlines of the states. So you'll love my outline of Colorado. I couldn't just put a box there. It didn't seem right. So for Colorado, again, we see must be compliant with WCAG 2.1 AA, which I did not put on here for some unknown reason. The digital materials have to conform to Office of Information Technology rules. And if you're in violation, there might be a court order requiring compliance. There might be monetary damages, including attorney's fees, and a potential fine of $3,500 payable to each plaintiff for each violation. And again, indemnification, requiring contractors to indemnify state entities against costs related to failure. So what we're seeing is over and over again, the states are saying, A, you must do this, and B, when you're making a purchase of something that's accessible, including ebooks, educational materials, and anything coming from a publisher, we are making sure that you are building it accessibly and that you are buying it accessibly, which puts the onus on the publisher, the vendor, in order to make that content accessible. So how can we do it? I will offer up sort of two perspectives on building accessibility into culture from two different directions, right? So there are sort of the top-down initiatives where senior management can help drive the organization towards a more accessible future. One is to create policies and assign accountability. Make sure that everybody in the organization understands that accessibility is a part of their job requirement, that in their day-to-day, they should be looking at what they can do to influence the accessibility of what's going to your customers. That includes making sure that there's training available for your developers, your designers, your content teams, and your procurement teams. And there's a lot of great training programs that are out there. DQ has a huge number of trainings that you can access. There are many free trainings that are available online. There's a lot of resources that are available to learn about the introduction to accessibility, but also how accessibility applies to your job specifically. Use a VPAT. Get your tools, get your ebooks evaluated. When you're producing anything for accessibility, it's so easy to miss the things that you've become so used to. Oh, that's a great question. What's a VPAT? I apologize. I should go back. So a VPAT is a voluntary product accessibility template. It's a template that's used in order to let a user know, again, sore throat, sorry, to let a user know whether a product meets certain accessibility requirements included in WCAG. Once the VPAT is filled out, the voluntary product accessibility template, we call it an ACR, which is an accessibility conformance report. But generally, people use those two phrases interchangeably between VPAT and ACR. But this is a great way to communicate what accessibility work you've been doing. A VPAT can be created for a platform and product. It can also be created for an individual EPUB. Basically, what you're looking at is creating a report that says whether or not your content aligns to the WCAG requirements, and anything where the requirements don't apply, you would just state that in the report. There are other ways that you can communicate the accessibility of your EPUBs, but I do think that VPATs are a pretty valuable tool for understanding the overall rules that need to be met and what is going to apply to what you're producing. I apologize. Michael, do you mind jumping in and answering the question about where you can get a VPAT?
Yeah, you can get a VPAT in a number of different places, really. It's one of those things, is why they created Google. You just Google VPAT. VPATs are good as a starting point. It certainly is not the it's not the ending point. Just like we talked about automated tools versus manual review. If you don't have one, it's a great place to start. To me, the most operative word in the phrase is V, it's voluntary. There should also be like some kind of caveat that it's basically a self-assessment. So if you go to two garages, you go to the first garage, it says Mike's garage, I do great work, just ask me, as opposed to you go to the garage next door, which is Rachel's garage, she does great work, ask the AAA. So it's a little bit different level of things, but it certainly is a very good exercise to go through. You can do it basically on any digital thing. You can do it on a single book, you can do it on a platform, you can do it on an application, you can do it on whatever you want. And it helps people understand basically where they are, somewhere between 0 and 100 on how close they are. There are other things available, tools like Ace by Daisy, which is free. Benetech has an entire program called Global Certified Accessible GCA, which walks the publisher through the entire create process. Macmillan was one of our first certified publishers. ACE will not satisfy. I just saw somebody popped up, ACE will satisfy compliance. It will not. It's a great starting place. H is going to catch maybe 30-35% of the things. The most obvious things, like if you have an H3 without an H2, it'll point that out. But there's a lot that cannot be done automatically. And the A in ACE stands for automatic. So EPUB check, somebody just put that up there, just like EPUB check. Yeah. EPUB check's another good tool. So these are two tools, EPUB check and ACE. They're free, they're easily available, and they are good measures to help you understand how close you are to compliance. They are not get out of compliance school free cards. They're just going to help. They're just going to help you on your journey. So you're going to need to either build an internal team like Macmillan has, or go to an organization like Benetech as an example for GCA. There are other organizations around the world which also do certifications, or some combination of those things.
And what I would say is that I wouldn't use a VPAT as a reporting mechanism for each individual EPUB. What I would use it for is a high-level understanding of where you are and are not meeting those standards. So you can use it on a sampling of EPUBs, you can use it on a certain style of EPUB, and it'll give you a better way to communicate to your customers what you have done so far and where you need to go. Brooke has a link to the VPAT template that she's going to post in the chat. But yes, and there are many tools that can be used for testing of your materials, including the ones that Michael talked about, EPUB Check and ACE. I can say from personal experience, what we've done is as we built the requirements for a Macmillan Learning ebook, Accessibility was certainly a part of it, and we wanted to make sure that we were validating the rules that we had determined. So what we did was we built an in-house validator. It uses the rules that are in EPUB check. It uses the rules that are in ACE, but it also uses some custom rules that we've written in order to make sure that it aligns with the standards that we've implemented within our own content. The important thing about that is that it acts as a guardrail before content goes live. Many of you will work for organizations where if you're working in accessibility, you're not necessarily touching every single piece of content. The nice thing about building a validator like this or finding or using a validator like this is that you can put them in as gates in order to go out to other organizations. So before content is uploaded to our content management system, if it's in the form of an EPUB, it goes through our EPUB validator and gets kicked back if it's not meeting the requirements that we've set forth. Not everybody can do that. But again, this is something that can be initiated on the senior management level in order to minimize the amount of time that you spend doing manual checking and also minimize the number of EPUBs that slip through the cracks in terms of the content. That said, it is super important that you continue to do manual testing as well. There are things that the automated checkers will not catch, and it absolutely cannot simply go through an automated process and then go live. Michael, I saw
Yeah, I want to
the
build on
mic go
that.
down.
Yeah, I want to build on that. So Benetech's a charity solely focused on what we're talking about today. This is what we do, right? Increasing the accessibility of digital content for people with print disabilities. That's our jam. 25 years we've been doing this. And we don't even have a fully automated process. We use the tools that Rachel described. We use EPUB Check. We use ACE by Daisy. There's a more sophisticated tool also from Daisy, which is a bit more complex, which we also use. And we built the GCA process, which is the only totally independent EPUB certification process in the world, right? Other organizations do certifications. They all do great jobs too. LEA as an example in Italy and things like that. We are totally independent. We're not a publisher. We're not part of a government entity. We're not part of a publishers association, entirely independent. And even in that process, even after 6 years, even after building a collection of 1.3 million titles, even after doing 33 million downloads, we still have very well-trained people who look at things before we put that GCA stamp on there. GCA operates at the production level. So we don't look at every book you create. We look at the way you create books. It's the old give a person a fish versus teach a person a fish kind of thing. So, and Rachel, if she wants to talk more about it during this or another time, she can tell you because Macmillan's been through. What we do is we teach the publisher how to create the book fully accessible as part of their regular production process. And then we analyze the production process and we say, okay, if you keep doing it this way, your books will be accessible. And then we check in from time to time to make sure that you're still behaving yourself, basically, because the rules change and sometimes personnel changes. So there's a quick understanding that even Benetech, who is entirely focused on this one specific issue, still uses manual review.
Thank you so much for that. So other pieces that I included in here about maintaining an accessibility statement on your website. I love to point people to macmillanlearning.com/accessibility, which is our current accessibility statement. We're also working on an update to that to include more information about the Title II legislation. So keep an eye out for changes to that website coming over the course of the summer. Make sure that you're tracking known issues. If you have customers that are continually reporting that the alt text isn't what they expected, if they're reporting that the images don't have the tables and graphs don't have the color contrast they expected, if they're reporting that the page numbers don't align to the page numbers in the printed book, these are all issues to keep track of so that you can change the template that you're using to produce your ebooks. You can change your plans for how you produce the ebooks, and you can update your process going forward. And then, of course, keep audit logs. And this is very much a senior management top down protect yourself. But it is important to be able to show your accessibility journey. When customers reach out to you and say, what are you doing about accessibility? It's so easy to say, we're prioritizing it. Accessibility comes first. We want born accessible books. But one of the best things that you can do for customers is to be able to point them to the changes that you've made over time. And so one of the things that we do at Macmillan is we give customers information, not just about where our content and platforms are now, but also where they're going. So we'll say over the course of the last month, these are the things that we've changed, and these are the things that we plan to change. And then we continue with that. And really what we're trying to do is show that we're not just talking about accessibility. We're not just telling customers that we know the legislation is here, we know it's important, we're going to do it, but we're showing that that movement is happening. But you're not all senior managers, and some of this needs to happen from the ground up, which is how it works in a lot of organizations. So a couple of things that you can do just to get yourself started if you're pretty early in your journey. One is to just learn about accessibility and share what you learned with others. Take a course, take a mini course, watch a video on YouTube, find an explanation of accessibility on LinkedIn. There are so many resources out there. I even hear that BISG has an accessibility resources section on their page. Is that right, Brooke?
It sure is. I've already dropped the link in the chat, but I will drop it in again just for
Can't say it
top
enough.
of your list.
The next one is to teach yourself how to use one accessibility testing tool. And once you've learned how to use it, teach two of your colleagues. One of the easiest ones to start with is a color contrast tester. There are two that are out there that are super easy to use and free. One is from the Paciello group, which is no longer called the Paciello group. I can't remember what they're called now. The other is from WebAIM, I believe. It's basically an eyedropper that you use to test the front color or the foreground color and the background color and see if it's TPG, thank you, Bill, to see if it's meeting the contrast requirements. Once you figure out how that works, show two of your colleagues. Ask them to show two more. And ask for that conversation to continue so that you're seeing more and more people testing for accessibility as a part of their day-to-day instead of relying on a small group or a single person whose job accessibility is, or who has accessibility in their job title. Normalize prioritizing accessibility. Just think about it every day. Do one thing that has to do with accessibility in your work. And most importantly, you can advocate and you can influence, and it doesn't have to be forceful. It can be so simple. Ask in your meetings if there's an accessible version of something. Ask if alt text needs to be added before something goes live. Volunteer to run accessibility checks. Offer to help write image descriptions. Offer to test for color contrast. Suggest adding accessibility to meeting agendas, suggest adding it to processes. Ask where accessibility checking is falling in your current workflow and where it should go. All of these things will bring accessibility awareness up and bring you closer to the point where you're able to produce accessible content as a part of your born accessible process in publishing. So just like quick takeaways, WCAG 2 AA is a great place to start your focus right now if you haven't. But you should definitely make a roadmap for 2.2 since more legislation is coming down the line that's going to require that. Don't look for ways out of this. I hear a lot of questions from people about what they don't have to do or how they can get out of having to do this. Try not to look at it from that mindset. look at it from the mindset of reaching out to a whole new group of customers who want to access your content and want to learn from it and want to enjoy it. Do an accessibility audit, figure out where you are now so you can figure out what gaps you need to fill. Remember that the automated checkers are going to help you, but also they're not going to get you all the way there. So you really do need to spend some time with the content you're already producing to figure out where the gaps are. And when you're road mapping from those results, make sure that you're including everyone. It's not just about finding that one tool that's a silver bullet and it's going to save you from ever having to do accessibility work. It's about making sure that people understand the importance of accessibility. It's about making sure that there's a process that integrates it in every step and making sure that you have the tools that are available to help you do that. And that is all she wrote.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This has been a really robust presentation. The chat has been very lively. There's lots of questions coming in. We do have a number of questions in our Q&A that I will dive into, but before I do, I just want to ask folks in the chat, if you've posted a question in the chat that you'd like the panelists to address and not just the general audience, please do share that in the Q&A so that we can organize that a little bit better and get to it, since we do have a high volume of things coming in.
I'd like to, before we jump into that, I just want to point out two things very quickly.
Of course.
First, there's been a lot of discussion about legislation and enforcement and all those other kind of things. It's important to know that anybody can bring an action against an institution that's in violation. You don't have to have a print disability. You don't have to be a student. You don't have to, if you live in basically that taxing population area, you can bring an action. If you wanted to watch the high school live streaming of graduation and it's not closed captioned, then you can bring an action. You don't need to have any kind of disability. It's just a violation of the law, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is if an institution gets put into an action, then they basically are at a point of surrender, because whoever's adjudicating this, whether it's the Office of Civil Rights or whoever it is, you're now living on their time frame. So it's their time frame, it's their budget, it's their interpretation of the rules and regulations. So if you just go about the simple things, do some of the things we discussed and some other things we've been talking about, that's the best path. Rachel said something very important, which is don't look for a way out. That's not going to work, right? It's not the right thing to do. It's not the smart thing to do. And it's not the required or legal thing to do. Find a way to come into compliance with these rules and regulations. You're going to build better books. The end. A fully accessible book's a better book than a not fully accessible books. And you probably, this is not a promise, because not only am I not a lawyer, I'm also not a salesperson. I don't promise any increase in sales, but I can tell you 20+% of the Earth's population has a print disability, and they're not buying your ebooks because they can't read them. So you're currently getting 0 from that group. So if you close any of that gap, it'll be better. Plus discovery. Now that the people who decide what you see on the internet, when you look for things on the internet, and I'm not going to name them, but you know they are, a well-formed ebook with proper alt text descriptions and things like that, your content's going to surface way more on SEO than it would on your Onyx feed, because you have well done alt text descriptions. So I just wanted to put those things out there for consideration.
Great. Thank you very much for those additions, Michael. It's really useful to know. So diving into our Q&A, for folks that are getting their books ready for EAA, will those EAA requirements cover all of the updates for Title II, or are there differences between these two sets?
It will. The EAA requirements align to WCAG 2.1 AA, which is great. It means that all the requirements that you're trying to meet in your books that you're selling internationally, you're also trying to meet inside the US. There is an additional requirement with the EAA, which is the exposure of the accessibility metadata, which is not part of the Title II requirement, but I highly recommend it to people. We at Macmillan are only just starting our journey to figure out the best ways to expose that metadata, although we have a preliminary presentation on our international site, so that we know that we're meeting those requirements for the European Accessibility Act.
Great. What advice do you provide publishers with PDF backlists? Converting large volume of books is a huge investment.
Yeah. One of the wonderful things about working for an educational publisher is that we go into new editions with a fair frequency. So my first answer is obviously work in education. But when I look at the backlists for other publishers, the things that I say to focus on are generally usage. Are you meeting the largest audience possible? If you have 5 people that have looked at this content over the course of the last 5 years, you're going to have less of an impact than when you're looking at something that 50,000 people have looked at, or even 5,000 people have looked at, or 500. So prioritize content and prioritize books that are reaching a very large audience. Prioritize things that are necessary and up to date, right? So look at content that's talking about recent legislation, helping people understand AI and the helpful uses for it, as well as the drawbacks. Things where you're making significant contributions to the knowledge of the population at large. But ultimately, the thing that's going to save you the most time and money, I think, is templatizing. And it's not something that everybody loves to hear, because we all love books and we love every step in making them. And we want each one to feel unique and interesting and special. There is a lot of work that can be done in making something the same across all of your ebooks that will prevent you from seeing recurring errors over and over again. And in creating these templates and creating these standard ways of presenting information, not only are you making it easier for you to present that information to people, but you're making it easier for them to understand it. So if I know that when I go into a St. Martin's Press book, I've already navigated through a specific type of table of contents. I know what to expect. I know what to expect from their heading structures. I know what to expect from page numbering and how it matches to the print book. Having those templates is a beautiful thing for ease of use, and definitely something that will reduce time to creating accessible ebooks in your backlog. Michael, it looks like you want to say something.
Yeah, I just want to echo on the backlist thing. This comes up in every conversation. I think, like when I talk to cab drivers, they bring up their backlist. I don't know. I mean, everybody brings up their backlist, right? Yes, I still take cabs, just for those of you who are wondering. The backlist, this becomes a mathematical equation, right? And I don't want to boil down the art and science of publishing down to simple math, but the reality is many books that are in your digital backlist are only there because nobody's keeping track of how much the server time is costing you, and that you're buying Jeff Bezos a new yacht once a month because you just got lights blinking on and off in your digital backlist. So the first approach, yes, that's true. Cab drivers are big fans. Thank you, Brian. They have a lot of time for reading. So the first thing you need to look at is, my rule of thumb is, would I go print a regular print run for this book? If it's 100 books or 1,000 books, whatever a regular print run is for me. Not print on demand, because that doesn't count, because it's just sitting there digitally until somebody buys one. But would I commit as a publisher to reprint this book? If the answer to that question is yes, absolutely make that book fully accessible. The next thing is, are there other author care issues? An author's coming up with another title. I don't sell a ton of this other title, but I want to, for whatever my reasons, have the other books that this author did, right? So those are the 2 big ones. And then when you start to look at as Rachel said, if 5 people looked at it, that's a number. 50 people is a bigger number, 500, 5,000, whatever. You have to look at it that way, because your backlist will paralyze you thinking about, I've got 10,000, 20,000, 50,000, 100,000. Not everybody has the resources. Taylor and Francis, which has like a 80,000 title backlist, they're touching everything. But it's a giant multinational corporation, and they have an entire team of people working on their accessibility. I'm not advocating that to anybody listening to this, unless Taylor and Francis is listening. Well, I don't have to advocate to them because they're already doing it. But you really need to look at it with a cold, hard economic eye. Would I reprint this book? Yes, automatically make it fully accessible. Is there another reason, author care, or this book is important for these other reasons? Yes. Beyond that, the real question you should be asking is not should I make this book accessible? Why do I have this book in my backlist? That should be your question. So if you don't have a good answer to that, then just push delete or put it on an offline server and let it sit over there. It won't matter. But if you're going to sell the book, the legislation in both circumstances, the EAA and the ADA, doesn't care when the book was published. So if it was published in 2025 or 1925, if you have a digital version and you're going to offer it for sale, you are exposed to this legislation. So think carefully about what you're doing.
Useful. Well, we do have a number of questions left, and we've got about 7 minutes on the hour, so I'm going to rapid fire a few. So a little bit more concise answers, and let's see how many of these they can get through. Can we touch on disproportionate burden and reasonable burden exceptions to this legislation? Examples, graphic novels, accessible descriptions. How does a small publisher approach this?
So reasonable burden does not exist under Title II of the ADA. There are a handful of exceptions, none of which would apply in the case of, say, a graphic novel. What I recommend in most cases is to work closely with the artist upon the creation of the graphic novel. They know what they're trying to convey with their images. And so they're the best person to tell you what should be included as an image description.
Benetech is launching an internal effort to address this issue. So if anybody out there is a graphics novel or a manga publisher, Michael J at benetech.org, happy to talk to you and we can work on this together.
We've heard in the chat quite a bit of discussion around alt text. Do you have any advice for using Gen AI to craft alt text, which of course would need to be reviewed by a human for accuracy? Any advice on tools, prompts, when to engage a human, etc.?
Yes. I've worked with a number of different tools in terms of AI generation of alt text. I do have some favorites. I don't feel like it's probably best practice to name them all out loud, but I'm happy to. If somebody wants to email me, it's Rachel Comerford at Macmillan.com, and I'm happy to tell you what's been working for me and what hasn't been working for me. I will say that there are a lot of tools out there that are available for licensing that have been carefully developed in this regard. But by all means, if you are super enthusiastic about building your own tool, go for it. I would give it a try and see what you get. But just, again, like make sure that that human element is included because it is very important. I know I said I would keep it brief, but there's one other thing to say about this, which is to remember the purpose of the alt text, which is you need to describe the image for the audience that it's supposed to reach and for the context that it's in. So you want to make sure that when you're using AI to generate alt text, that alt text is not a repeat of the caption, it's not a repeat of information that's already provided in the basal text, and that it's actually providing information to the target audience. So if it's a graph that's meant to teach you how to read graphs, it should be information about the structure of the graph, not necessarily about the content.
Thank you. The cases that the Department of Justice has pursued since 2020 don't yet include the digital requirements. Could the number of complaints increase when the new requirements go into effect in 2026 and beyond?
It could definitely.
So not only am I, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Not only am I not a lawyer, I'm not a lawyer predictor, but I'm going to say yes anyway. I'm going to say yes for two reasons. We're 35 years into the ADA, and the community that was designed to benefit from the ADA is sick and tired of this problem. That's number one. Number two, the way the rule is written, as I said, it does not require the person who brings the action to have a disability. So you're just opening it up to anybody who's just looking to try and make the world a better place. So I would estimate yes. It is important to understand that whatever's going on at the Department of Education and or the Department of Justice and the current administration, et cetera, not relevant here because anybody can bring a suit. So it doesn't require a person with a federal badge to show up on your front doorstep to bring this action.
Are there accessibility checking tools specifically for audiobooks and audiobook metadata?
Oh, I don't know. Michael, do you know?
No, I don't know that. I don't know that. There is a great audiobook format, the Daisy Talking Book, which allows all sorts of incredible controls for people who use audio as their main way to consume information. And you find with people who need audio to consume, the speeds at which people listen to the books and the way they drop bookmarks and things like that. So I'm sorry, I don't have a good answer. That's a great question. So whoever asked that question wins. Whatever fabulous prize you have in your closet there, Brooke, they win
Stump
that
the
prize. So that's
speakers.
the best. There you go.
There we go. Can we talk a little bit about tagging for language shifts between an article's primary language and other languages scattered throughout the publication for screen reader pronunciation? There seem to be a lot of guidelines for alt text, but this audience member is not really finding much official guidance for language tagging.
So I don't think I don't know if there's any hard and fast rules around language hacking. What I generally do is if you're in the middle of an English paragraph and somebody says cafe au lait, you don't have to get all excited and switch it into French or anything like that. But if you're in the middle of a book whose declared language is Spanish, and then you're going to do a paragraph in Latin or Portuguese or something, absolutely. So names, places, food, things which would commonly be understood by anybody if they just heard the words, you're probably generally safe. When you shift in works where comprehension is going to be a problem. So if you're going from a word or two or a name or a location to a sentence or two or a paragraph or two, then shift. And please, 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 everybody, shift back, because the horrible experience you're trying to avoid by having an English language book switch into German will be just as horrible if you stay in German and don't switch back into English. So that's my, I don't know, Rachel, if you guys don't do a lot of non-English language stuff, but those would be, I think, the best guidelines.
Yeah, I did point in the chat to the Daisy Accessible Publishing Knowledge Base, which has a section on language. And if you scroll way down, with apologies, it's not near the top, but there's an overriding the language section that gives sample code for how to override the language for like a brief portion of the text.
Yeah, Daisy is a tremendous free resource, inclusivepublishing.org, daisy.org. They do testing on reading systems that I shouldn't say they because I'm on the board there. Daisy, I should just do it that way. Daisy does a tremendous amount. Again, almost everything they do is free, and they're all there. Everything is there to help you grasp onto these rules and regulations and put them into practice.
Thank you. Well, we are at time. We still have a number of questions in the Q&A for folks that could stay on for a few extra minutes. Do we want to just try and knock out a few more questions? Should I submit this to you as a document? What's your preference here? Do you have another moment?
I can stay for a few more minutes.
I can
Okay.
stay for a few
I'm
more
not sure anybody
minutes,
wants to listen to me, but yeah.
but I can stay for a few more minutes, but also like there are so many questions here. Document would also be great.
Yeah, agreed. I can definitely get that a summary to you. We've talked a little bit throughout conversations today about doing manual reviews, but what exactly does a manual review look like? What does going through the code look like if no one on my team is a coder?
If no one on your team is a coder, who's building the ebook? So the person who is building your EPUB should also have the skills necessary to do a manual check. But Michael, can you think of any resources that have like oh, well, if you run the title through ACE, don't you also get a list of things that need to be checked manually?
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yeah.
Um, and those also have links to explainers, don't they?
Yeah, almost everything in there has a reference point that you can go to and learn from. So
Okay.
As
yeah,
the book industry.
inclusivepublishing.org has a bunch of really, again, free, a bunch of really great stuff, including like what we like to call the Franken book, where we just took a ton of different stuff and pretended it was all in one book. Like everything we could think of, this is going to occur. So we just threw it in this book. So you can do that. You can test against that. You can look at, oh, I'm doing something like that. How should I do it? That kind of stuff. So again, all this is free and all this is intended to help people on their journey.
Thank you. Now, we've been talking about books, book industry study group. We have a focus on books, but we do have a question about journals. Regarding backlist, there's a set number. How do you approach a large journal back volume? And how does the Title II updates affect journals? If we could just touch on it very quickly.
Yeah, if it's archived, it doesn't fall under Title II. Archived internet content is not included in the requirement. If it is not archived, I would say pick low-hanging fruit. Figure out what you want to do on a broad scale and implement broad scale changes, and then keep working your way through the requirements across the list. So if today you can make sure that each one of them has the language defined, then maybe tomorrow you can make sure that each one of them has links identified correctly. And just keep working your way through the requirements instead of working your way through each individual article, because that's gonna slow you down.
Yeah, the journals people are typically ahead because they've been in an HTML or XML world for a long time. So they're probably in better shape than they think they are.
Uh, this one's for Rachel. It sounds like Macmillan Education's review is closer to a schema, i.e. checking content, than a DTD, checking structure of a document. Would you say that's fair?
Yes, that is very true. It's stacked validation of the schema of the EPUB, which we found to be a little bit more effective than the D2D structure.
Any tips on checking accessibility via tools like Daisy as someone who's not an ebook creator and knows nothing whatsoever about coding?
Yeah, check out the Daisy knowledge base when you come across something in the manual check or something in the report that you don't understand. The knowledge base, who's written by the tremendous Matt Garish, has so much information about what you need and why you need it. I highly recommend using it on not as like a nighttime reading on your bedside table, but as a resource while you're trying to figure out how to make your ebooks accessible.
And we've answered this already, but because the question keeps popping up, just to really hone down on that, is there an exception for small companies like under the EAA?
Nope.
No, there are no exceptions in the ADA, none whatsoever.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much. That, really wraps up most of the questions that we've got. I'll make sure that I get that question list to you, to the speakers, if you want to provide any other content to us that we can distribute to our audience today. Would really appreciate that. Just a reminder for the folks that are still on the call, thanks so much for joining us. This was recorded and we'll get those slides, supplementary invitation, and information all out to you shortly. So thank you so much to Rachel and to Michael. And if you have further questions, please do follow up and definitely check out our accessibility resources. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.